The gunshot echoed through the dusty street of Willow Creek as Daisy O'Connell watched her father crumple to the ground, his final breath escaping in a plume of dust. At 18, she now stood alone in the world, orphaned and penniless in the unforgiving frontier of 1875 Wyoming territory. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up to them, but she never imagined they would cost him his life or that they would cost her freedom. "Your pa owed me $500, girl," Bartholomew Jenkins said, wiping the blood from his weathered hands. The old rancher stood a foot taller than Daisy, his silver-streaked beard and cold eyes making him look every bit of his 50 years. "And I aim to collect, one way or another." 2 days later, Daisy found herself being escorted to Jenkins' sprawling ranch 20 miles outside of town. The terms had been made clear to her by the town sheriff, who seemed more concerned with settling debts than protecting a young woman's future. She was to marry Jenkins, becoming both wife and property, her body and labor the payment for her father's sins. "You'll have a good life here," Jenkins said as they approached the grand house that overlooked acres of cattle land. "Better than most girls in your situation. I need a wife, someone to keep my home and eventually bear my children." Daisy fought back the bile rising in her throat. "I'm not property to be traded." "Your father thought differently," Jenkins replied, his calloused hand gripping her arm as he led her inside. "The papers are already signed. You belong to me now." The house was larger than any Daisy had ever seen, with ornate furniture and fine draperies, but it felt like a prison. The housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, showed her to a bedroom larger than the entire cabin she had shared with her father, but the luxury brought no comfort. "The master expects you to join him for dinner," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice devoid of emotion. "There's a dress in the wardrobe. Make yourself presentable." As the door closed behind the housekeeper, Daisy collapsed onto the bed, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. She thought of her father, for all his faults and the dreams they had shared of starting fresh. Now she was trapped, sold like cattle to a man who saw her as nothing more than property and a vessel for children. That evening, she sat across from Jenkins at a table that could seat 20. He spoke of his business, his cattle empire, and his plans to expand further west. Not once did he ask about her hopes or fears. Not once did he treat her as anything other than another acquisition. "You'll learn to be happy here," he said, cutting into his steak. Many women would be grateful for this opportunity. To be sold. Daisy's voice shook with rage, Jenkins's expression hardened. "To be provided for. The wedding will take place in 2 weeks. Until then, you'll learn your duties from Mrs. Abernathy." The days passed in a blur of instruction. Daisy learned how Jenkins liked his shirts pressed, his meals prepared, his home arranged. She learned which topics were acceptable for conversation and which would earn her a stern glare. She learned that in this house, her opinions meant nothing. A week before the wedding, Daisy was sent into town with Mrs. Abernathy to collect fabric for her wedding dress. The irony of being made to choose the garment that would seal her fate wasn't lost on her. The general store was busy that morning, filled with ranchers' wives gathering supplies and exchanging gossip. Daisy stood before a bolt of cream-colored fabric, running her fingers over the material that would become her prison uniform. "That would suit you," a voice said from behind her. Daisy turned to find a young man watching her, his blue eyes kind beneath the brim of a worn cowboy hat. His face was tanned from working in the sun, but his smile was gentle. "Thank you," she replied, dropping her gaze. "I'm Kieran Adams," he said, extending his hand. "New to these parts." "Just hired on at the Rockingham Ranch." Daisy hesitated before taking his hand. "Daisy O'Connell, pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss O'Connell." His hand was warm and calloused, a working man's hand, but his touch was gentle. "Are you preparing for a special occasion?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Abernathy appeared at her side. "We need to finish our business, Miss Daisy. Mr. Jenkins is expecting us back by noon." Kieran's expression changed at the mention of Jenkins's name. "You're with Bartholomew Jenkins." She's to be Mrs. Jenkins next Saturday, Mrs. Abernathy announced, her tone making it clear this was a matter of pride for the household. Daisy watched as understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like concern, then anger. "I see," he said, his voice now tight. "Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials." "Thank you," Daisy whispered, though the words felt like poison on her tongue. As Mrs. Abernathy led her to the counter to pay for their purchases, Daisy felt Kieran's eyes following her. For the first time since her father's death, someone had looked at her as a person rather than a possession. On the ride back to the ranch, Daisy found herself thinking about the cowboy. There had been something in his eyes, something that made her feel seen. But such thoughts were dangerous. Her path was set, her future decided. The next few days passed in a flurry of wedding preparations. Jenkins invited business associates and neighboring ranchers to witness the event, eager to showcase his young bride. Daisy felt like a prize heifer being readied for auction. 3 days before the wedding, Daisy was in the garden, gathering flowers for the table as Mrs. Abernathy had instructed when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting one of Jenkins's ranch hands, she was startled to see Kieran Adams dismounting from a chestnut mare. "Mr. Adams," she said, clutching the basket of flowers to her chest. "What brings you to the Jenkins ranch?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low as he glanced toward the main house. "What I heard in town, is it true? Are you marrying Jenkins willingly?" Daisy looked away. "My father owed him money. This arrangement settles the debt." "That's not marriage," Kieran said, stepping closer. "That's slavery with a different name." "What choice do I have?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I have nowhere to go, no family, no money." "You could leave," Kieran suggested, his voice urgent. "I have friends heading to Colorado. They'd help you start fresh." Daisy shook her head. "He would find me." Men like Bartholomew Jenkins don't let go of what they believe is theirs. Kieran's jaw tightened. "You're not his. You're not anyone's but your own." A shout from the house interrupted them. One of the ranch hands had spotted Kieran and was heading their way. "I have to go," Kieran said, mounting his horse quickly. "But this isn't over, Miss O'Connell. No one should be forced to marry against their will." As he rode away, Daisy felt both hope and fear surging within her. The hope that someone cared about her fate was as dangerous as it was comforting. That evening, Jenkins questioned her about her visitor. The ranch hand had reported seeing her speaking with a strange cowboy. He was asking for directions, Daisy lied, her heart racing. He seemed lost. Jenkins studied her face for a long moment. "I don't want you speaking to strangers, especially not men. It's not proper for a woman betrothed." "Yes, Mr. Jenkins," she replied, keeping her eyes downcast. The day before the wedding, tension filled the house. Jenkins's business associates had begun to arrive, filling the guest rooms and spilling into the bunkhouses. Daisy was kept busy helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare meals and ensure the house was immaculate. In the afternoon, as she was arranging flowers in the dining room, Jenkins entered with a small jewelry box. "For tomorrow," he said, opening it to reveal a gold wedding band. "It belonged to my mother." Daisy stared at the ring, a symbol of a prison sentence rather than love. "It's beautiful," she lied. "You'll make a fine Mrs. Jenkins," he said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I've been alone too long. A man needs a wife, especially as he grows older." That night, Daisy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Bartholomew Jenkins, bound for life to a man she feared and resented. She thought of running, but where would she go? How far would she get before he found her? Dawn broke with a clear sky, as if nature itself was mocking her despair. Mrs. Abernathy arrived early to help her dress, lacing her into the corset so tightly that Daisy could barely breathe. "A small waist is a lady's greatest asset," the housekeeper said, pulling the laces tighter. The wedding dress, with its cream fabric and lace trim, might have been beautiful under different circumstances. As it was, Daisy felt like she was being wrapped in her own shroud. The ceremony was to take place in the garden at noon. By 11, the house was filled with guests, men in suits and women in fine dresses, all gathered to witness Bartholomew Jenkins take a wife young enough to be his daughter. At 11:30, as Mrs. Abernathy was arranging her hair, a commotion arose from downstairs. Raised voices, then the sound of breaking glass. The housekeeper frowned, setting down the hairbrush. "Wait here," she instructed, hurrying from the room. Daisy sat at the vanity, her heart pounding. The commotion grew louder, and then suddenly the bedroom door burst open. Kieran Adams stood in the doorway, his face flushed and a cut above his eye bleeding slightly. "We need to go," he said, breathing hard. Now Daisy rose shakily to her feet. "What's happening?" "I'm getting you out of here," Kieran replied, grabbing her hand, "but we have to hurry." They rushed down the back stairs, avoiding the main hall where Jenkins and his guests were gathered. As they reached the kitchen, the door to the dining room swung open and Jenkins stood there, his face contorted with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared, striding toward them. "You dare enter my house and attempt to steal my bride." Kieran stepped in front of Daisy, shielding her with his body. "She doesn't belong to you or anyone else, Jenkins. She's a woman, not property to be bought and sold." "Her father sold her to me fair and square," Jenkins snarled, reaching for the gun at his hip. "I paid good money for her, and I intend to collect what's mine." "She's leaving with me," Kieran declared, his voice steady despite the danger. "And if you try to stop us, you'll regret it." Jenkins drew his gun, but Kieran was faster. With a swift movement, he knocked the weapon from the older man's hand, sending it skittering across the floor. The two men grappled, Jenkins's age giving way to Kieran's strength and youth. "Run, Daisy," Kieran shouted as he struggled with the rancher. Daisy hesitated for only a moment before gathering her skirts and dashing toward the back door. Outside, she found a horse saddled and waiting, and she realized Kieran had planned this escape carefully. Behind her, the sounds of the struggle continued, and then Kieran emerged from the house, slightly bloodied but triumphant. He quickly mounted his own horse and extended his hand to Daisy. "We need to ride hard and fast," he said, helping her adjust her position on the horse. "Jenkins has men all over this property." They set off at a gallop, Daisy clinging to the saddle as they raced away from the ranch. Behind them, shouts and gunfire erupted, but they were already too far ahead to be caught easily. They rode for hours, following trails that Kieran seemed to know well, avoiding the main roads where Jenkins's men might be looking for them. By nightfall, they had reached a small cabin nestled in a grove of trees beside a stream. "We'll be safe here for the night," Kieran said, helping Daisy dismount. Her legs were sore from the unaccustomed riding, and the wedding dress was torn and dirty from their flight. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a single room containing a bed, a table, and a fireplace. Kieran busied himself lighting a fire while Daisy stood awkwardly in the center of the room. "Whose cabin is this?" she asked, finally finding her voice. "It belongs to a friend," Kieran replied, coaxing flames from the kindling. "He lets me use it when I'm working this range. No one will look for us here." As warmth began to fill the small space, Daisy sank onto a chair, the reality of what had just happened washing over her. "I can't believe we escaped," she whispered. "But what happens now? Jenkins won't simply let me go." Kieran sat across from her, his face serious in the firelight. "I have friends in Colorado, like I mentioned before, good people who can help you start a new life, far from Jenkins's reach." "And you?" Daisy asked, surprised by how much she cared about the answer. "What will you do?" "I'll make sure you get there safely," he said with a gentle smile. "After that, well, I suppose I'll keep drifting. It's what I do." Daisy looked down at her hands, still wearing the delicate gloves Mrs. Abernathy had insisted upon for the wedding. Slowly, she peeled them off, feeling as though she was shedding a skin that had never truly been hers. "I don't even know you," she said softly. "Why would you risk your life for me?" Kieran was quiet for a moment. "After I met you in the store, I asked around about Jenkins. What I heard made my blood boil. No woman should be traded like cattle, especially not to a man known for his cruelty." "Cruelty," Daisy asked, her voice faltering. Jenkins has had 2 wives before you, Kieran explained grimly. Both died under questionable circumstances. The law never found enough evidence to charge him, but people talk. A chill ran through Daisy that had nothing to do with the night air. I didn't know. How could you? Kieran rose and went to his saddlebag, retrieving some dried meat and bread. Here, you need to eat something. As they shared the simple meal, Daisy felt a strange sense of peace descending upon her. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of her future, she was free for the first time in weeks. And she owed that freedom to this man she barely knew but already trusted with her life. Tomorrow we'll head east, Kieran said as they finished eating. There's a town 3 days' ride from here where we can catch a stage to Denver. Once we're in Colorado, Jenkins's influence won't reach us. Daisy nodded, though the thought of the journey ahead filled her with trepidation. I have no money, she admitted. Nothing but this ruined dress. Kieran smiled reassuringly. I've been saving for a while, we'll manage. As night deepened, the question of sleeping arrangements became unavoidable. The cabin had only 1 bed, a fact that neither of them had mentioned until Kieran began spreading his bedroll on the floor. You take the bed, he said, avoiding her eyes. You need the rest more than I do. Daisy wanted to protest, but found herself too exhausted to argue. The wedding dress, now dirty and torn, was impossible to sleep in, but she had nothing else to wear. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran rummaged in his pack and pulled out a clean shirt. It's not much, but it's better than sleeping in that, he said, handing it to her and then turning his back to give her privacy. Gratefully, Daisy slipped behind a crude screen in the corner and struggled out of the wedding dress, feeling a symbolic weight lifting as the garment pooled at her feet. Kieran's shirt was large on her but clean and comfortable, smelling faintly of soap and open air. When she emerged, Kieran was already settled on his bedroll, his hat pulled down over his eyes. Good night, Miss O'Connell, he said softly. Daisy, she corrected him, climbing into the bed. After today, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. She saw his smile in the fading firelight. Good night, Daisy. Good night, Kieran. Dawn broke with birdsong and the gentle rushing of the stream outside. Daisy woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks despite the simple accommodations. Kieran was already up, tending to the horses outside. When he returned, he carried a bundle of clothing. I packed these before I came for you, he explained, handing them to her. They belong to my sister. They might not fit perfectly, but they'll be better for riding than that dress. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Daisy accepted the clothes, a simple skirt, blouse, and sturdy boots. You planned everything. I tried to, he admitted, though Jenkins putting up more of a fight than expected wasn't part of the plan. As Daisy changed behind the screen, she called out to him, How did you get past all his men? There must have been 20 people at the ranch yesterday. The wedding was a distraction, Kieran explained. Everyone was focused on the ceremony. I slipped in through the back while the servants were busy in the garden. Dressed in her new clothes, Daisy felt transformed. The fabric was worn but clean, and the boots, though slightly large, were infinitely more practical than her delicate wedding shoes. They set out after a quick breakfast, riding east as planned. Kieran kept them off the main trails, following creek beds and cutting through meadows where they were less likely to be seen. Jenkins will have men searching every road between here and the state line, Kieran explained as they paused to rest the horses at midday. But they'll be looking for a woman in a wedding dress, not a woman dressed for travel. Daisy nodded, grateful for his foresight. How did you become so good at avoiding the law? Kieran's expression darkened slightly. I'm not running from the law, just from men who think they are the law. There's a difference. I didn't mean, no, I know you didn't, he said, his smile returning. I've spent my life moving from place to place, working ranches, driving cattle. You learn to stay off the beaten path when necessary. That night, they camped under the stars, unable to reach another safe house before dark. Kieran built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid detection. They ate a simple dinner of beans and more dried meat, sitting close to share the warmth of the flames. "Tell me about your life before Jenkins," Kieran said as they watched the stars emerge. Daisy sighed, remembering. "My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just my father and me. He was a good man but weak for gambling. We moved often, usually one step ahead of his creditors." "I'm sorry about your father," Kieran said softly. "He wasn't perfect, but he loved me," Daisy replied, wiping away a tear. "He wouldn't have wanted this for me, being sold to Jenkins, I mean. He was desperate and drunk when he made that agreement." "No decent father would," Kieran agreed. "What about your family?" Daisy asked, eager to shift the conversation away from painful memories. Kieran poked at the fire with a stick. "My parents had a small farm in Missouri. Lost it during the war. My father never really recovered, died a few years later. My mother followed soon after. My sister married a shopkeeper in St. Louis. I write to her when I can." "So you've been alone a long time," Daisy observed. "Alone but free," Kieran replied. "There's something to be said for that." As they settled for the night, Kieran again insisting on sleeping on the ground while Daisy used his bedroll, she found herself watching him in the dying firelight. This man had risked everything for her, a woman he barely knew. In a world that had treated her as property, he had seen her humanity. They rode hard the next day, Kieran growing increasingly vigilant as they approached more populated areas. By late afternoon, they could see smoke rising from chimneys in the distance, the town of Oak Ridge, their first significant stop on the journey to Colorado. "We'll need supplies," Kieran said as they paused on a ridge overlooking the town. "And information. I want to know if Jenkins's men have been through here." "Is it safe for both of us to go into town?" Daisy asked, suddenly anxious at the thought of civilization after their days in the wilderness. "We'll go in separately," Kieran decided. "I'll get the supplies. You wait at the church on the edge of town. Churches are sanctuary, even in the worst places." Daisy nodded, though the thought of being separated from him, even briefly, filled her with dread. He had become her protector, her guide, and she was beginning to realize something more. The small church was quiet when Daisy slipped inside, the late afternoon light filtering through simple stained glass windows. She sat in a pew near the back, her head bowed as if in prayer, though her thoughts were far from spiritual. "Are you seeking refuge, my child?" A voice asked, startling her. An elderly priest stood in the aisle, his kind face creased with concern. "Just a moment of peace, Father," Daisy replied, forcing a smile. The priest nodded knowingly. "Peace is hard to come by these days. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." He moved away, giving her space, but his presence was comforting. Daisy closed her eyes, genuinely praying now for safety, for freedom, and for Kieran's quick return. An hour passed before the church door opened again. Daisy turned expectantly, but instead of Kieran, 3 rough-looking men entered. They weren't dressed like churchgoers, their spurs jingling on the wooden floor as they scanned the space with predatory eyes. Daisy ducked her head, pulling her bonnet lower to hide her face, but it was too late. The largest of the men nudged his companion, pointing in her direction. "Excuse me, miss," he said, approaching her pew. "We're looking for a young woman traveling with a cowboy. Might have come through here today." "I've been here alone all afternoon," Daisy lied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The man studied her face. "You look familiar." "I don't believe we've met," Daisy replied, rising to leave. "Now if you'll excuse me," the man grabbed her arm. "Not so fast. You fit the description we were given. Blonde hair, blue eyes, around 18 years old." "Release her," the priest commanded, suddenly appearing beside them. "This is a house of God." "This is Jenkins's property," the man snarled, tightening his grip on Daisy's arm, "and he wants her back." The church door burst open again and Kieran strode in, his hand resting on his gun. "She belongs to no one," he said, his voice echoing in the sacred space. "Let her go." The 3 men turned, spreading out to face the new threat. "Adams," the leader spat. "Jenkins said you might be the one who took her. There's a price on your head now." "Is that supposed to scare me?" Kieran asked, stepping closer. 3 against 1 seems fair enough. The priest moved between them, his hands raised. There will be no violence in this church. Take your quarrel elsewhere. The standoff stretched for a tense moment before the leader of Jenkins's men smirked. We'll catch up to you eventually. Jenkins doesn't let go of what's his. Tell Jenkins she was never his to begin with, Kieran replied, his eyes locked on the man holding Daisy. Reluctantly, the man released her arm. This isn't over. I believe it is, the priest said firmly. Now leave before I summon the sheriff. The 3 men backed away, their eyes never leaving Kieran and Daisy. As they reached the door, the leader called back, "We'll be watching the roads." After they'd gone, Kieran rushed to Daisy's side. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him, though her arm ached where the man had gripped it. "But they found us so quickly." "Jenkins must have telegraphed ahead to every town within 100 miles, Kieran said grimly. "We need to change our plans." The priest, who had been watching this exchange with concern, approached them. "You two are in trouble, I take it," Kieran hesitated, then nodded. "She was being forced to marry against her will. I helped her escape." The priest's expression softened. "There's a back way out of the church, through the cemetery. Follow the path into the woods and you'll reach the old Miller cabin. It's abandoned now, but sound. You can rest there tonight." "Thank you, Father," Daisy said, touched by his kindness. "God created us to love freely, not by compulsion," the priest replied. "Go with my blessing." They slipped out the back way as suggested, keeping to the shadows as they made their way through the cemetery and into the dense woods beyond. The Miller cabin was indeed abandoned but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and a roof that didn't leak. "We can't take the stage now," Kieran said as they settled inside. "They'll be watching every departure. What will we do?" Daisy asked, the fear she had been holding at bay beginning to overwhelm her. Kieran took her hands in his touch warm and reassuring. "We keep moving. There's more than one way to reach Colorado." That night, huddled in the abandoned cabin, Daisy felt closer to Kieran than ever before. The danger they faced had created a bond between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. As they sat before the small fire he had built, their shoulders touching, Daisy found the courage to ask the question that had been in her heart since he'd rescued her. "Why did you really come for me, Kieran? The truth." He was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "When I saw you in that store, something inside me recognized something in you, a spirit that shouldn't be caged." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "And then when I heard about Jenkins, about what he was doing, I couldn't stand by and let it happen." "You risked your life for a stranger," Daisy said softly. "You're not a stranger anymore," Kieran replied, his voice equally soft, "and I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The tension between them shifted, deepened. Daisy felt herself drawn to him, not just out of gratitude but out of a growing affection that surprised her with its intensity. Before either could act on these feelings, a noise outside jolted them to attention. Kieran was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, moving toward the window. "Stay back," he whispered to Daisy. "Someone's out there." Heart pounding, Daisy pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. Footsteps crunched on the forest floor, circling the cabin. Kieran eased the door open a crack, peering into the darkness. Suddenly, a shot rang out, splintering the wood beside his head. He slammed the door shut, bracing it with his body. "It's Jenkins's men," he said grimly. "They must have followed us from the church. What do we do?" Daisy asked, panic rising in her throat. Kieran's mind raced. There has to be a back way out. These old cabins often had escape routes in case of Indian attacks. They searched frantically, aware of the men outside preparing to rush the cabin. Behind an old trunk, they discovered a trapdoor leading to a crude tunnel. "Go," Kieran urged, helping Daisy into the narrow passage. "I'll be right behind you." The tunnel was low and dark, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through the damp earth. Behind them, they heard the cabin door being broken down, followed by angry shouts as their pursuers discovered the empty room. The tunnel emerged in a thicket of bushes 50 yards from the cabin. Kieran helped Daisy to her feet, and they ran deeper into the forest. guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. They ran until Daisy's lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out beneath her. Finally, they paused beside a small stream, listening for sounds of pursuit. "I think we lost them," Kieran whispered, his breath coming in quick gasps. "But they'll search the area come daylight." "We can't keep running forever," Daisy said, the reality of their situation sinking in. "Jenkins won't stop hunting us." Kieran's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we need to make him stop." "How?" Daisy asked, unable to imagine anything that would deter the powerful rancher. "We need to get to the territorial governor," Kieran explained. "Jenkins has influence in this county, but even he can't defy the territorial government. If we can prove he was forcing you into marriage, that he effectively bought you from your father, but that would mean going back toward Cheyenne," Daisy interrupted. "Closer to Jenkins, not further away." "It's a risk," Kieran admitted, "but it might be our only chance for you to truly be free." They spent the remainder of the night hidden in a dense thicket, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn broke, they set out northward toward Cheyenne, the territorial capital. It was a bold move, one that might lead them directly into Jenkins's grasp, but it offered the hope of a permanent solution. Their journey was slow, hampered by the need to avoid main roads and settlements. They foraged for food, caught fish from streams, and slept under the stars. Despite the hardship and danger, Daisy found herself drawing strength from Kieran's presence. He taught her to build fires, to find edible plants, to read the stars for navigation skills she had never needed in her previous life. On the third night of their new journey, as they sat beside a small fire deep in the wilderness, Kieran suddenly took her hand. "Daisy," he said, his voice serious. "There's something I need to tell you." She tensed, fearing bad news. "What is it?" "If we succeed, if we reach the governor and convince him to help us," Kieran said slowly, "you'll be truly free. Free to go wherever you want, to build whatever life you choose." "Yes," Daisy agreed, uncertain where he was leading. "I want you to know that you owe me nothing," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I didn't rescue you so that you would feel indebted to me. Your life is your own." Daisy felt tears welling in her eyes. "Is that what you think, that I feel obligated to you?" "I don't know what you feel," Kieran admitted. "But I needed you to know that whatever happens in Cheyenne, you're free to make your own choices. And if my choice is you?" Daisy asked softly, surprising herself with her boldness. Kieran's breath caught. "Daisy, you gave me back my freedom," she continued, finding courage in the depth of her feelings. "But in doing so, you also gave me the freedom to choose who I love, and I choose you, Kieran Adams." In the firelight, she saw wonder and joy spread across his face. Slowly, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly, Kieran leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Daisy responded, her heart soaring with emotions she had never experienced before. When they finally parted, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you in that store," he confessed. "But I was afraid to hope you might feel the same." Daisy smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Love isn't something that can be bought or sold. It's a gift freely given, and I give mine to you." They reached the outskirts of Cheyenne 5 days later, approaching the city with caution. Jenkins's influence would be strong here, perhaps even stronger than in the smaller towns they had avoided. "We need to find someone trustworthy who can get us an audience with the governor," Kieran said as they observed the city from a hillside. "Someone Jenkins hasn't bought." "The church," Daisy suggested, remembering the priest who had helped them. "The clergy often have connections to government officials," Kieran nodded. "Good thinking. We'll try the cathedral first." They entered the city separately again, Kieran first to scout for danger, then Daisy following an hour later. They met at the cathedral as planned, slipping inside during afternoon services to blend with the congregation. After the service, Kieran approached one of the priests, explaining their situation without revealing their identities. The priest, Father Michael, listened intently, his expression grave. "What you describe is indeed troubling," he said when Kieran had finished. "Force or coercion in marriage is against both law and God's will. I know someone who might help you reach the governor." Father Michael led them to a small room behind the altar where they waited anxiously. An hour later, a distinguished-looking man in a well-tailored suit entered, accompanied by two armed deputies. "I'm Judge William Harrington," he announced, studying them carefully. "Father Michael says you have a serious allegation against Bartholomew Jenkins." "Yes, sir," Kieran replied, standing respectfully. "He forced Miss O'Connell here into an engagement after her father's death, claiming ownership of her to settle a debt." The judge turned to Daisy. "Is this true, young lady?" Daisy nodded, finding her voice. "My father owed Mr. Jenkins money. After he was killed, Mr. Jenkins said I belonged to him as payment. He was going to make me marry him, even though I'm only 18 and he's 50. "These are serious accusations," Judge Harrington said, his expression troubled. "Jenkins is a powerful man in this territory." "We have evidence," Kieran said, producing a folded document from his jacket. "This is the agreement Jenkins made with Daisy's father. I took it from his desk when I helped her escape. It explicitly states that he was purchasing her as property." The judge examined the document, his frown deepening as he read. "This is unconscionable. It treats a human being as chattel, which has been illegal in this territory since the Emancipation Proclamation." Hope surged within Daisy. "Then you'll help us." "I will bring this to the governor immediately," Judge Harrington promised. "In the meantime, you'll both stay under the protection of the court. Jenkins has too many men in his pay to risk your safety elsewhere." That night, Daisy and Kieran were given separate rooms in a building adjoining the courthouse, guarded by deputies. Though they were apart for the first time in days, Daisy felt safer than she had since her ordeal began. The next morning, they were summoned to the governor's office. Governor John Thayer, a stern man with a military bearing, received them in his private chambers, along with Judge Harrington and the territorial attorney. "I've reviewed your case," Governor Thayer said without preamble. "The document you provided is damning evidence against Jenkins. No man in this territory may purchase another human being regardless of debts owed." Daisy felt light-headed with relief. "What happens now?" "I've issued a warrant for Jenkins's arrest," the governor replied. "He'll be charged with attempted human trafficking, among other offenses. His days of operating above the law are over." "And Daisy?" Kieran asked, his concern evident. "Will she be safe?" "Miss O'Connell will remain under the protection of the territorial government until Jenkins is apprehended," Governor Thayer assured them. "After that, she'll be free to go wherever she pleases." The following days passed in a blur of legal proceedings. Word came that Jenkins had fled upon learning of the warrant, abandoning his ranch and taking as much wealth as he could carry. Posses were dispatched to track him, but the vastness of the territory made his capture uncertain. Despite Jenkins's flight, the governor declared Daisy legally free of any obligation to him or his estate. The agreement between Jenkins and her father was invalidated, and she was granted a small settlement from Jenkins's seized assets as compensation for her ordeal. 2 weeks after their arrival in Cheyenne, Daisy and Kieran stood on the steps of the courthouse, finally free to determine their own futures. "What will you do now?" Kieran asked. Though his eyes revealed he already knew his own heart's desire, Daisy smiled up at him. "I was thinking of heading to Colorado. I hear it's beautiful country and I know a certain cowboy who might be willing to show me around." Kieran's face lit up with joy. "I can think of nothing I'd rather do." He hesitated, then dropped to one knee, taking her hand in his. "Daisy O'Connell, these past weeks have shown me what love truly is: not ownership, not obligation, but a choice freely made every day. Would you choose to spend your life with me as my wife and partner?" Tears of happiness spilled down Daisy's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding took place in the cathedral where they had first sought help, with Father Michael officiating and Judge Harrington standing as witness. It was a simple ceremony, but one filled with more love and joy than the elaborate wedding Jenkins had planned could ever have contained. As Kieran placed a ring on her finger, not a symbol of ownership but of partnership, Daisy felt the last shadows of her ordeal lifting. They had faced danger together, and together they had won not just their freedom but a future bright with possibility. 3 months later, they stood on the porch of a small homestead in the Colorado Territory, watching the sun set over the mountains. With the money from Daisy's settlement and Kieran's savings, they had purchased this land and begun building a life together. Any regrets? Kieran asked, his arm around her waist as they surveyed their new home. Daisy leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, the fear, the flight, the fight for freedom. Every step had led her to this moment, to this man who had risked everything to save a woman he barely knew and had won her heart in the process. "Not one," she replied, turning to face him. "Every choice that brought me to you was worth it." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, no longer running, no longer afraid. They had found in each other not just love, but a profound understanding of what freedom truly meant, the right to choose one's own path, and the joy of choosing to walk it together. Word eventually reached them that Bartholomew Jenkins had been captured trying to cross into Mexico. He would spend the remainder of his days in territorial prison, his empire of fear dismantled, his power broken. But Daisy and Kieran hardly spared him a thought. They were too busy building something Jenkins could never understand: a marriage founded on mutual respect, genuine affection, and freely given love. 5 years later, their homestead had grown into a prosperous small ranch, with cattle grazing on the hillsides and horses in the corrals. Their family had grown too, with twin daughters who had Kieran's blue eyes and Daisy's golden hair, and a son who toddled after his father with determination. On the anniversary of their escape from Jenkins's ranch, they always took a moment to remember the day that had changed their lives forever, the day a brave cowboy had declared, "She's leaving with me," and set them both on the path to true freedom and lasting love. As they sat on their porch that evening, watching their children play in the yard, Daisy took Kieran's hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you," she said simply. He didn't need to ask what for. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. "I'd do it all again," he replied, "for the chance to love you." And in the glow of the setting sun, surrounded by the life they had built together, they both knew that some journeys, no matter how difficult, were worth every step, especially those that led to home.